Welcome to today's story, a tale of betrayal, deception, and unshakable resilience. Imagine discovering that your seemingly perfect life was built on lies. In a quiet, small town, Emily Carter's world shatters as she uncovers her husband Mark's shocking affair and an even darker secret, a web of criminal schemes and manipulation that threaten to destroy everything she holds dear. How far would you go to protect your child and reclaim your life? Stay tuned as we dive into this gripping journey of heartbreak, courage, and ultimate redemption. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. The year was 2015, and the town of Crestwood seemed frozen in time, tucked into the rolling hills of the Midwest. It was a place where nothing ever really changed, until everything did. The streets, lined with neat rows of Victorian homes, buzzed with the chatter of neighbors who had known each other for decades. It was the kind of town where the corner diner doubled as the morning gossip hub, and no secret stayed hidden for long. Or so people thought. Our story begins with Emily Carter, a 36-year-old high school English teacher who personified calm and predictability. With her wavy chestnut hair, a smile that could soften even the most stubborn student, and a penchant for quoting Jane Austen at the dinner table, Emily had earned her place as one of Crestwood's most beloved residents. Married to Mark Carter, a 39-year-old contractor with an easy charm and a knack for fixing anything but his own flaws, Emily believed her life was steady, if not entirely exciting. The Carters lived in a modest but cozy craftsman house on Maple Street, its porch swing a favorite spot for Emily to sip her evening tea. Together, they had built a life that, from the outside, appeared perfect. Their 9-year-old daughter, Lily, was the light of their lives, her laughter filling the gaps in their marriage that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. But beneath the surface, their relationship had grown stale, its cracks papered over by routine, and a shared dedication to Lily. Emily often caught herself wondering when her marriage had turned into a series of polite conversations and distracted nods. Mark was always busy, his phone buzzing late into the night with texts and calls he waved off as work emergencies? It wasn't until one particularly chilly November evening that Emily's carefully constructed world began to tilt. Emily was grading essays at the kitchen table, the scent of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air. Lily sat across from her, humming softly as she colored the sound of the front door opening, barely registered, until Mark's voice boomed from the hallway. "Emily, I need to talk to you." The urgency in his tone made her look up, her brow furrowed. Mark's usually confident demeanor seemed unsteady. He stood there, clutching his phone, his face pale. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, concern lacing her voice. She closed the red pen she had been using, setting it aside. "It's nothing," Mark said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Work stuff." Emily had learned not to press. Mark's job as a contractor often brought unpredictable hours and high-stress situations. Still, something about his body language felt off, his hand lingering on the back of his neck, his eyes darting toward the door. But before she could probe further, Lily's giggle broke the tension. "Dad, look at my drawing," she chirped, holding up a colorful depiction of their family. Emily couldn't help but notice how much space Mark had taken up on the page compared to her and Lily. "Looks great, sweetheart," Mark said, his voice softening as he crouched to kiss the top of her head. "You're my little artist." And just like that, the moment passed, leaving Emily with an unsettled feeling she couldn't shake. The next day, Emily's world took another step toward unraveling. When she ran into Heather Blake at the local coffee shop, Heather was Crestwood's version of a small-town celebrity. A 28-year-old yoga instructor with a perfectly toned body, an Instagram account full of smoothie bowls and inspirational quotes, and a reputation for turning heads wherever she went. Emily wasn't one to feel insecure, but something about Heather's too bright smile and overly familiar way of addressing Mark always rubbed her the wrong way. That morning, Heather's greeting was particularly saccharine. "Emily, Mark mentioned you were working on your school fundraiser," Heather chirped, her blue eyes sparkling with a touch too much enthusiasm. "If you need any help, let me know." Emily forced a polite smile, her grip tightening on her coffee cup. "Thanks, Heather. I'll keep that in mind." As Heather floated away, Emily's thoughts churned. Since when had Mark been talking to Heather about school fundraisers? or anything for that matter. The seeds of doubt, once barely noticeable, had begun to take root. A week later, Emily was doing laundry when she noticed something odd. Mark had left his jacket draped over the back of a chair in the living room, and as she picked it up, a piece of paper fell from the pocket. It was a receipt from the Bluebird Inn, a quaint bed and breakfast 2 towns over. The date on the receipt coincided with one of Mark's supposed work trips. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the slip of paper. Her mind raced, 1,000 explanations forming and dissolving in an instant. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was damning. "Mom, what's wrong?" Lily's voice pulled Emily from her spiraling thoughts. She quickly stuffed the receipt into her pocket, plastering on a smile. "Nothing, sweetie, just thinking about what to make for dinner." But as she watched Lily skip away, Emily knew she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut any longer. She had to find out the truth. That night, Emily waited until Lily was asleep before confronting Mark. The receipt felt like a burning coal in her pocket as she stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him scroll through his phone. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but strained. "Can we talk?" He looked up, his brow furrowing. "Sure, what's up?" Emily pulled the receipt from her pocket and held it out to him. "What's this?" For a moment, Mark froze. Then his expression shifted into something unreadable. "It's a receipt," he said flatly, as if stating the obvious would diffuse the situation. "I can see that," Emily snapped. "Why were you at the Bluebird Inn?" Mark's silence stretched on too long, and Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was a work meeting. I didn't want to drive back late, so I stayed the night." Emily's instinct screamed that he was lying, but without more evidence, she couldn't prove it. "Next time, just tell me," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't want secrets between us." "Of course," Mark said, forcing a smile. "No secrets." But as he kissed her goodnight, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her husband was slipping further and further away from her, and she was determined to find out why. The following days were a whirlwind of suppressed anxiety for Emily. She began to pay closer attention to Mark's behavior, noticing every suspicious glance at his phone, every vague excuse for late nights. When he mentioned another work trip coming up, she made a decision. Emily called her best friend Sophie, a fiery redhead with a knack for detective work and zero tolerance for dishonesty. Over coffee, Emily poured out her suspicions, and Sophie didn't hesitate. "If he's lying, you need proof," Sophie said firmly. "Borrow my car, follow him, find out where he's really going." Emily hesitated. Spying on Mark felt like crossing a line, but the gnawing doubt in her chest wouldn't let her rest. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." The night of Mark's work trip, Emily parked Sophie's car a block away from their house and waited. She felt equal parts fear and resolve as she watched Mark load his overnight bag into the trunk of his car. Once he pulled out of the driveway, she followed at a cautious distance, her heart hammering with every turn. The drive took them further than she expected, past the edge of Crestwood and into unfamiliar territory. When Mark's car finally turned into the parking lot of a sleek boutique hotel, Emily parked across the street, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. She watched as Mark stepped out of his car, and a moment later, Heather Blake appeared, her arms wrapping around him in a way that left no room for interpretation. Emily's world shattered in that instant. Everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her husband, and her life crumbled around her. But as she sat there, tears streaming down her face, a new resolve began to take shape. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Emily sat in her car for what felt like an eternity, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across the street, the boutique hotel stood as an unassuming accomplice to Mark's betrayal. She watched as Heather laughed, her hand lingering on Mark's arm before the two disappeared inside. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Her heart was pounding, her mind a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, humiliation. But amidst the chaos, one thought rang clear. This wasn't over. The drive home was silent except for the occasional sniffle as Emily wiped at her tears. She parked Sophie's car back in her driveway and slipped inside her house. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the dimly lit kitchen. Emily leaned against the counter, her eyes drifting to a family photo on the wall. In it, Mark had his arms around her and Lily, his smile warm and genuine. Or so she had believed. "How could you do this?" she whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Emily woke with a sense of grim determination. She wasn't the type to act rashly, and this situation would be no different. She needed a plan, and she needed more than just her own word if she wanted to confront Mark. So she called Sophie again. Over breakfast at their favorite diner, Emily laid out everything she'd seen. Sophie, ever the pragmatist, nodded thoughtfully. "Okay," she said, stirring her coffee. "Here's what we do. You need more proof, concrete proof, and not just for yourself. You might need it for, you know, legal reasons." Emily nodded, though the thought of a divorce still felt too overwhelming to process. "What do you mean, like photos?" "Photos, texts, anything. And if he's been hiding money or assets, you need to know that too." Over the next few days, Emily put on a brave face at work, grading essays and smiling at her students as if nothing was wrong. But at home, her evenings turned into covert operations. She began checking Mark's phone whenever he left it unattended. At first, it was nerve-wracking. Her hands shook every time she unlocked it. But soon, she found her rhythm. Mark wasn't as careful as she'd expected. His texts with Heather were buried under mundane group chats and work threads, but they were there, dozens of messages dripping with flirtation. One text stood out. "Can't wait for next weekend." "Same place?" Emily snapped a photo of the screen with her phone, her heart sinking further with every word. She also began to notice gaps in their finances. Mark had opened a separate savings account, something he had never mentioned to her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send alarm bells ringing in her mind. Emily didn't have to wait long for her next opportunity to confront Mark. That Friday, he came home late, the faint scent of perfume clinging to his jacket. Emily had been sitting on the couch, pretending to read, when he walked in. "You're late," she said, her tone calm but pointed. "Yeah, sorry. Work ran over," Mark replied, shrugging off his jacket. "Funny," Emily said, standing up and crossing her arms, "because I thought you were with Heather." The color drained from Mark's face, his confident demeanor faltering. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you," Emily said bluntly. "To the hotel. I saw you with her." Mark stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he stammered, "It's not what you think." "Really? Then what is it?" Emily demanded, her voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been cheating on me." Mark's excuses came tumbling out, a mess of half-hearted denials and weak justifications. But Emily wasn't buying any of it. "Save it," she snapped. "I have the texts, I have the photos, you don't get to gaslight me out of this." The argument lasted late into the night, their voices echoing through the house. Lily, thankfully, was spending the night at a friend's, sparing her from witnessing the chaos. By the time Mark retreated to the guest room, Emily felt both drained and strangely empowered. For the first time in years, she was standing up for herself. But the next morning brought a new kind of pain. As Lily came home, all smiles and stories about her sleepover, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of the secret she now carried. How was she supposed to tell her daughter that their family was falling apart, that her father wasn't the man they thought he was? In the days that followed, Emily's world turned upside down. She confided in her colleagues at work, one of whom suggested a lawyer. But it was the last person she expected, Heather Blake, who offered the most shocking revelation. Heather showed up at Emily's classroom after school one day, her face pale and drawn. "Emily," she said hesitantly, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." Emily's first instinct was to tell her to leave, but something in Heather's expression stopped her. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" Emily asked, her arms crossed. "I didn't know," Heather blurted out, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know he was married. He told me you two were separated." Emily stared at her, stunned. "You expect me to believe that?" Heather nodded, her voice breaking. "I swear, as soon as I found out I ended it, I had no idea he was lying to both of us." As much as Emily wanted to hate Heather, the raw sincerity in her voice gave her pause. Maybe Mark's betrayal ran even deeper than she'd thought. With Heather's confession adding weight to her case, Emily took the next step, hiring a private investigator. If Mark had been lying about their relationship, who knew what else he was hiding? The investigator's report came back a week later, and it was worse than Emily had imagined. Mark hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been using their joint accounts to fund weekend getaways, expensive gifts, and even a secret lease on an apartment in the city. The betrayal was staggering, but amidst the hurt, Emily found a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about saving her dignity, it was about protecting her future and Lily's. As Emily's story continues to unfold, we're reminded of the strength it takes to stand up for yourself in the face of betrayal. If you're enjoying this journey and want to see how Emily takes back control of her life, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring stories like this to life. Emily had reached her breaking point. Every lie, every betrayal, every unanswered question had built up into a storm of emotions that she could no longer contain. Armed with the private investigator's report and a newfound resolve, she decided it was time to confront Mark. Not in the safety of their home, but in a setting where the consequences of his actions would be impossible to ignore. Emily chose a Sunday evening for what she had come to call the reckoning. She invited her parents, Mark's parents, and a few close friends over for dinner. Mark, oblivious to her true intentions, agreed without hesitation. He even joked about Emily overachieving with the menu as he set the table. By the time the guests arrived, the house was filled with the scent of roast chicken and freshly baked bread. To the untrained eye, everything seemed normal. Emily greeted everyone with a warm smile, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured the wine. She caught Sophie's eye across the room, a silent acknowledgement of the storm about to hit. When everyone was seated, Emily took her place at the head of the table. She raised her glass, her voice steady but charged. "Before we dig in, I have something important to share." Mark looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing. "Emily?" She ignored him, pulling a folder from beneath her chair. "I've been doing some research," she said, her eyes locking onto Mark's, "and I think it's time we all had a little clarity." The room fell silent. Emily's parents exchanged uneasy glances, while Mark's mother reached for her husband's hand. Mark, on the other hand, laughed nervously. "Emily, what are you talking about?" She opened the folder and began laying out the evidence piece by piece. Photographs of Mark and Heather, the private investigator's report detailing the secret apartment, and a printout of the financial records showing the siphoned funds. "Do these look familiar?" she asked, her voice icy. Mark's face drained of color. "Where did you get those?" Emily ignored the question, her voice rising with every word. "For years I trusted you. I believed every excuse, every late night, every so-called work trip, and all the while, you were lying to me, to all of us." Her father leaned forward, his face dark with anger. "Is this true, Mark?" Mark stammered, looking around the table as if searching for an escape. "Emily, we can talk about this later. This isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," Emily shot back. "These people deserve to know the truth. They deserve to see the man behind the mask." Mark's initial shock gave way to anger. He slammed his fist on the table, making the wine glasses rattle. "You had no right to go digging into my personal life," he shouted. "You've completely humiliated me." "And what about what you did to me?" Emily fired back. "To our family you lied, you cheated, you stole, you humiliated yourself, Mark." The room erupted into chaos. Mark's parents tried to calm him down, while Emily's mother clutched her chest, clearly overwhelmed by the confrontation. Sophie, ever the loyal friend, stepped in to defuse the situation. "Everyone, let's take a breath," she said firmly. "But let's be clear. Mark, you owe Emily an explanation." Mark's face twisted with frustration, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any of the shouting had been. Just when Emily thought the evening couldn't get worse, the doorbell rang. She froze, her heart sinking as Sophie went to answer it. Moments later, Heather Blake walked into the room, her face pale but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice trembling, "but I couldn't let this go on any longer." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" Heather looked directly at her. I came to apologize. I didn't know he was married. He told me you were separated. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Is this true, Mark? Mark buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. Yes. Heather continued, her voice breaking. As soon as I found out, I ended it. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I thought you all deserved the truth. Emily felt a strange mix of vindication and rage. While she appreciated Heather's honesty, it didn't erase the betrayal or the damage done. By the end of the evening, the Carter family was in shambles. Mark left the house in a fury, his parents trailing after him in stunned silence. Emily's parents stayed behind to comfort her, though their own anger was palpable. Sophie helped clean up, her movements brisk and purposeful. Well, she said, tossing a stack of plates into the sink, I think it's safe to say the ball is in your court now. Emily nodded, her exhaustion evident. I don't know what's next, she admitted. But I know this. I'm done letting him control the narrative. In the days that followed, Emily met with her lawyer to begin the process of filing for divorce. She also worked with a financial advisor to untangle the mess Mark had left behind. It was a slow and painful process, but every step forward felt like a victory. She also began to rebuild her life in other ways. She threw herself into her work, finding solace in her students and the structure of her classroom. She even started taking evening yoga classes, a small but significant act of reclaiming her independence. Lily, ever perceptive, sensed the change in her mother. Are we going to be okay? She asked one night as Emily tucked her into bed. Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Yes, sweetheart, she said. We're going to be just fine. As Emily's journey continues, her strength and resilience shine through every challenge. If you're inspired by her story and want to see how she takes the final steps toward reclaiming her life, be sure to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring these stories to light. The weeks following Mark's exposure were a whirlwind of emotions and logistical chaos for Emily. The divorce papers had been filed, the financial arrangements were underway, and custody discussions loomed on the horizon. But for all the progress Emily had made, she knew the storm wasn't over. The real climax was still to come. It started with a phone call. Emily was at home, reviewing the budget for Lily's upcoming summer camp, when her phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed a name that sent a chill down her spine. Heather Blake. Emily hesitated, her thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of her wanted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity and a lingering need for closure won out. Hello? Emily? Heather began, her voice shaky but determined. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. It's about Mark. Emily sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Heather, I don't think there's anything left to say. I thought so too, Heather replied, but I just found out something, and I think you deserve to know. Can we meet? After a long pause, Emily agreed. If Heather had new information, she needed to hear it, if only to fully understand the man she had once loved. The two women met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Heather arrived first, fidgeting with her coffee cup as Emily walked in, her expression guarded. They exchanged a brief, awkward greeting before getting down to business. I found this, Heather said, sliding a folder across the table. It's bank statements, contracts, emails. Mark's been hiding a lot more than an affair. Emily opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents. What she saw made her blood run cold. Mark had been embezzling funds, not just from their joint accounts, but from his own company. He had funneled money into offshore accounts, using a network of shell companies to cover his tracks. Heather's voice trembled as she continued. He used me, Emily. Some of these accounts are in my name. If this comes out, I could go to jail. Emily's mind raced. The evidence in front of her was damning. Not only had Mark betrayed her emotionally and financially, but he had also involved another woman in his illegal schemes. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about criminal activity. What do you want me to do with this? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Heather met her gaze, her eyes filled with desperation. "Help me, I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes to bring him down, but I can't do it alone." That night, Emily stayed up late, poring over the documents Heather had given her. She knew she had to act carefully. Turning this evidence over to the authorities could have serious consequences, not just for Mark, but for her and Lily as well. If Mark suspected she was building a case against him, there was no telling how he might retaliate. The next morning, she called Sophie. "I need a lawyer," she said, her voice firm. "Not just for the divorce. Someone who can handle this." Sophie didn't hesitate. "I know just the person." Within days, Emily found herself sitting in the office of Miranda Hughes, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking down powerful men who thought they were untouchable. Miranda listened intently as Emily laid out the situation, her sharp eyes scanning the documents. "This is serious," Miranda said finally. "If we're going to do this, we need to be strategic. The goal isn't just to expose him, it's to protect you and your daughter." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready." As Miranda began building the case, Emily noticed a change in Mark. He became increasingly erratic, missing scheduled custody exchanges, leaving angry voicemails, and even showing up unannounced at the house. His once confident demeanor had been replaced by paranoia and desperation. One evening, he cornered her in the driveway as she was unloading groceries. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "I don't have anything to say to you," she replied, trying to brush past him. "You don't understand," he insisted, grabbing her arm. "If you go through with this, you'll ruin me." Emily yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing. "You did that to yourself, Mark. Now get off my property before I call the police." The case finally came to a head in court. Miranda had worked tirelessly to prepare, gathering evidence, organizing witness testimonies, and ensuring that Emily's rights were fully protected. The courtroom was packed with spectators, many of whom were Crestwood residents, eager to see how the drama would unfold. Mark sat at the defendant's table. His once polished appearance, now disheveled Emily, on the other hand, exuded quiet strength as she took the stand. She recounted the years of lies, the discovery of his infidelity, and the financial betrayal that had nearly destroyed her. Heather also testified, her voice shaking as she detailed how Mark had manipulated her into participating in his schemes. Her testimony was the final nail in the coffin, painting a picture of a man who had no regard for anyone but himself. When the verdict came, the tension in the room was palpable. The judge's voice rang out, clear and firm. "Mark Carter, you are hereby found guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." The relief that washed over Emily was overwhelming. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. Emily's journey is a testament to the power of resilience and the courage it takes to stand up for yourself. If her story has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. The courtroom verdict sent shockwaves through Emily's world and Crestwood itself. Mark's guilt wasn't just a legal conclusion. It was a public unmasking of a man who had built his life on deception. But as the dust began to settle, Emily realized her journey wasn't over. Mark's sentencing loomed ahead, and the fallout of his actions continued to ripple through their lives. This was the final act, the crescendo of a story that had consumed everything she thought she knew. 2 days after the verdict, Emily received an unexpected visit from Mark's lawyer. The man was calm but insistent, his polished demeanor doing little to mask the desperation of his request. "Mark wants to meet with you," he said, his voice low. "Privately." Emily's first instinct was to refuse. What more could Mark possibly have to say? But the lawyer's next words stopped her cold. "He claims he has something that could affect your future. And Lily's." Her maternal instincts overrode her hesitation. If there was even a shred of truth to the lawyer's claim, she had to hear him out. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet Mark at the local detention center under strict legal supervision. The room was cold and sterile, the kind of place where the air itself seemed weighed down by unspoken regrets. Mark was already seated when Emily walked in, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the man she had once known. He looked thinner, older, the arrogance stripped away to reveal someone far more fragile. "Emily," he began, his voice hoarse, Thank you for coming. Get to the point, Mark, she said, her tone flat. I don't have time for games. Mark sighed, rubbing his hands together nervously. I know I've done terrible things, and I don't expect forgiveness, but there's something you need to know, something I didn't want to come out in court. Emily crossed her arms, her patience wearing thin. Then why bring it up now? He hesitated, his eyes darting to the guard stationed by the door. Because it involves Lily. Her breath caught in her throat. What about her? Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have proof that someone's been siphoning money from her trust fund. It wasn't me. Emily's mind raced. The trust fund had been meticulously managed by her financial advisor, someone she trusted implicitly. But Mark's tone was too earnest to dismiss outright. Why should I believe you? I can prove it, he said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. That's a list of transactions. Look at the dates, they match when I was out of the country. Emily snatched the paper and glanced at it, her pulse quickening. If what Mark was saying was true, someone else had been betraying her. And Lily. After the meeting, Emily wasted no time. She called Sophie and Miranda, laying out the new twist in her already tangled story. Miranda, ever the strategist, took immediate action, enlisting a forensic accountant to audit the trust fund. Meanwhile, Sophie offered emotional support, her fiery determination a lifeline for Emily. If this is true, Sophie said, pacing Emily's living room, we'll find out who's behind it, and when we do, they'll wish they never crossed you. The audit uncovered a shocking truth. The financial advisor Emily had trusted had been skimming small amounts from the fund for years, hiding the theft behind a web of false reports and bogus expenses. The revelation left Emily reeling. This betrayal felt different, colder, calculated, and aimed at her most vulnerable spot, her child. Emily demanded a face-to-face meeting with the advisor, who had been immediately fired once the evidence came to light. The confrontation took place in a sleek downtown office, the contrast between the modern decor and the advisor's crumbling facade almost poetic. How could you do this? Emily demanded, her voice trembling with rage. You knew that money was for Lily's future. The advisor, a middle-aged man with a once impeccable reputation, stammered out excuses. I was in debt. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. But you didn't, Emily shot back. You gambled with my daughter's future, and you lost. By the end of the meeting, Emily had secured a promise of restitution and the advisor's agreement to testify against Mark in exchange for leniency. It was a small victory, but it felt like a turning point, a moment where Emily finally regained control over a life that had spiraled out of her grasp. The day of Mark's sentencing arrived, bringing with it a mix of dread and relief. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Emily sat in the front row, flanked by Sophie and her parents. Mark's parents were notably absent, their shame too great to face the public. When the judge handed down the sentence, 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7, Mark's shoulders slumped in defeat. It was a harsh sentence, but not undeserved. For Emily, it marked the end of a chapter, though the weight of his actions would linger for years to come. In the weeks that followed, Emily focused on rebuilding. She sold the house she had shared with Mark, choosing a smaller, sunnier home closer to Lily's school. The move felt symbolic, a shedding of the past and a step toward a brighter future. She also took steps to safeguard Lily's trust fund, working closely with Miranda and a new financial advisor to ensure its integrity. The process was tedious but necessary, a reminder of the lengths she would go to protect her daughter. Meanwhile, Heather reached out again, this time with an offer of friendship. Though their history was complicated, Emily found herself softening toward the other woman. They weren't enemies, after all, just two people caught in the web of the same man's lies. Emily's story is a powerful example of resilience and the strength it takes to reclaim your life after betrayal. If her journey has resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us share stories of courage and empowerment with the world. The tension that had been simmering for months was now boiling over, threatening to consume everything in its path. Emily stood at the edge of a precipice, the weight of her choices pressing heavily on her shoulders. But as the final pieces of her fight fell into place, She realized one undeniable truth. She wasn't just surviving Mark's betrayal, she was reclaiming her life. Despite his guilty verdict and sentencing, Mark wasn't done trying to assert control from prison. He filed a petition for joint custody of Lily, claiming that his incarceration shouldn't prevent him from being a part of his daughter's life. The audacity of his move enraged Emily. "He's trying to keep a foothold in our lives," she told Miranda during an emergency meeting. "After everything he's done, how can he even think this is okay?" Miranda was calm but firm. "He's grasping at straws, Emily. But we'll fight this. The court needs to see how unfit he is, not just as a father, but as a role model." The ensuing custody hearing was one of the most grueling moments of Emily's life. Mark's attorney painted him as a reformed man who had paid his debt to society. Emily countered with the mountain of evidence Miranda had meticulously compiled, showing the extent of his deception and the danger he posed to Lily's well-being. The most harrowing moment came when Emily took the stand. She spoke from the heart, describing the impact Mark's actions had on their family. "Lily deserves stability, love, and trust," she said, her voice breaking. "Mark has shown time and time again that he can't provide those things." The judge's decision was swift. Full custody was awarded to Emily, with only supervised visitation granted to Mark. It was a victory, but the emotional toll left Emily drained. In the aftermath of the custody battle, Emily faced an equally difficult challenge: explaining everything to Lily. At 9 years old, Lily was old enough to sense that something was wrong, but too young to fully understand the complexities of her father's actions. One evening, as they were folding laundry together, Lily finally asked the question Emily had been dreading. "Mom, why doesn't Dad live with us anymore?" Emily paused, the pile of clothes in her lap suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. "Your dad made some bad choices, sweetheart," she said carefully. "Choices that hurt a lot of people, including us right now. He's trying to make up for those mistakes." "Does he still love me?" Lily asked, her voice small. Emily's heart broke at the vulnerability in her daughter's eyes. She pulled Lily into a hug, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Of course he does, and so do I. No matter what happens, you are so loved." Just when Emily thought the worst was behind her, a new threat emerged. One evening, she found an envelope slipped under her front door. Inside was a single typed note. "You're not as safe as you think." Emily's hands trembled as she read the words, her mind racing with questions. Was it Mark, someone connected to his schemes, or was it just a cruel prank? She called Sophie immediately, who arrived within minutes, her fiery determination shining through her concern. "We need to take this seriously," Sophie said, pacing the living room. "Call the police and Miranda." The police were sympathetic but cautious. Without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Miranda, however, took a more proactive approach. She hired a security consultant to assess Emily's home and install new locks, cameras, and an alarm system. For days, Emily lived on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound. But as time passed without further incident, she began to relax. Just slightly. Whoever had sent the note seemed to have disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived. Amid the chaos, Heather re-entered Emily's life in an unexpected way. She had been attending therapy to process her role in Mark's schemes and reached out to Emily with a surprising proposition. "I want to start a support group," Heather said during one of their coffee meetings. "For women who've been betrayed like us, I think it could help a lot of people." Emily was hesitant at first. The idea of revisiting her pain in such a public way felt overwhelming, but as she thought about it, she realized how much strength she had drawn from sharing her story with Sophie and Miranda. Maybe Heather was onto something. Together, they launched Rebuilding Together, a community group dedicated to helping women navigate the fallout of betrayal and rebuild their lives. The first meeting was small, just a handful of women sharing their stories in a circle, but the sense of camaraderie was palpable. For the first time in months, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone, and neither were these women. Together, they were stronger. The mysterious note wasn't the last twist in Emily's journey. A few weeks later, she received a call from Miranda. "You need to come to my office now." When Emily arrived, Miranda laid out new evidence that had surfaced. a series of emails from Mark, sent from prison, attempting to coerce one of his former accomplices into targeting Emily. "He's desperate," Miranda said, her voice grim. "He knows he's losing control and he's trying to lash out, but this time, we can stop him." With Miranda's help, Emily filed for a restraining order, ensuring that Mark couldn't make any contact with her or Lily. The court granted the order without hesitation, further isolating Mark and protecting Emily's hard-won freedom. As the months passed, Emily's life began to take on a new rhythm. She poured herself into her teaching, finding joy in her students' successes. Rebuilding together grew steadily, becoming a beacon of hope for women across Crestwood. One sunny afternoon, Emily and Lily planted a small garden in their backyard. As they worked side by side, laughter bubbling up between them, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. The road had been long and harrowing, but they had made it through. Emily's story reminds us of the resilience we all possess, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. If her journey has inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us share stories of hope and empowerment with the world. As Emily's life slowly began to stabilize, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's influence still loomed over her, and Lily like a dark cloud. Despite the restraining order and his incarceration, the remnants of his schemes and manipulations continued to unravel. The stakes were higher than ever, and Emily knew she needed to bring this story to its ultimate conclusion, not just for her own peace, but for her daughter's future. It was a chilly autumn evening when the unease that had been gnawing at Emily finally materialized. She had just finished putting Lily to bed when the doorbell rang. At first, she thought it might be Sophie stopping by unannounced, but the shadowy figure on the porch sent a shiver down her spine. Peering through the peephole, Emily recognized the man immediately, Greg Walters, one of Mark's former business partners. His name had come up several times during the investigations, always linked to shady dealings and backdoor agreements. She hesitated, her instincts screaming to call the police, but curiosity and frustration propelled her to open the door, just a crack. "Greg," she said, her voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Greg's demeanor was nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting someone to jump out of the bushes. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's about Mark." Emily tightened her grip on the door. "I think we've talked about everything we need to. If you're here to intimidate me—" "No, no," Greg interrupted, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "You don't understand. I'm here to help." Reluctantly, Emily let Greg inside, keeping her phone close in case things took a turn. Over a tense cup of coffee, Greg revealed the reason for his visit. "Mark's still pulling strings," he admitted, his voice low. "Even from prison, he's got people on the outside who owe him favors, and they're not above using force to get what he wants." Emily's stomach churned. "And why are you telling me this now?" Greg hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. "Because I'm one of those people, but I've had enough. I've got a family too, and I can't keep living like this. I want to help you bring him down for good." Emily studied him, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Or was this just another layer of Mark's manipulation? Greg handed her a flash drive, his hands shaking. "Everything you need is on here," he said. "Emails, financial records, even recordings. It's enough to bury him. And anyone still working with him." Emily's fingers closed around the small device, its weight feeling far heavier than its size. "Why should I believe you?" "Because if you don't," Greg said, standing to leave, "you'll never be free of him." Emily immediately called Miranda, who agreed to meet her at the law office the next morning. Together, they reviewed the files on the flash drive. The evidence was damning. Mark had been orchestrating a scheme to launder money through a network of accomplices, using the funds to maintain influence and plan his eventual comeback. "This is it," Miranda said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "This is the nail in the coffin." But they both knew the risks. Mark still had allies, and exposing this information could make Emily a target. "We need to be smart about this," Miranda said. "Let me handle the legal side. You focus on staying safe." That evening, Emily double-checked the locks on every door and window in the house. She installed an extra layer of security on her home cameras, and even let Max, their usually lazy Labrador, sleep by the front door. Despite her precautions, sleep eluded her. Every creak and groan of the house sent her heart racing. In the early hours of the morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Thinking of you. Call me if you need anything." Emily smiled faintly. The gesture, a small comfort in an otherwise nerve-wracking night. Sophie had been her rock throughout this ordeal, and knowing she wasn't alone, helped her summon the strength she needed. The next day, Miranda filed a motion to present the new evidence to the court, and the legal process surged forward. But Mark wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. A week later, Emily received a call from Miranda. "You need to come to the courthouse," she said. "Mark's lawyer is pushing back. They're claiming the evidence was obtained illegally." The courtroom was electric with tension when Emily arrived. Mark, appearing via video call from prison, looked as smug as ever. His lawyer argued passionately, twisting every piece of evidence into a question of legality and motive. But Miranda was relentless. With every point Mark's team raised, she countered with cold, hard facts, refusing to let them spin the narrative. When Greg took the stand to testify about Mark's threats and illegal dealings, the atmosphere shifted. The jury leaned in, their expressions growing darker with every word. Mark's composure began to crack. By the time Miranda delivered her closing argument, it was clear he had lost the upper hand. When the judge delivered the final ruling, the courtroom was silent. Mark's additional charges would add years to his sentence, ensuring he would remain behind bars for the foreseeable future. His remaining assets were seized, and his accomplices faced their own legal consequences. For Emily, the victory was bittersweet. Mark's downfall had come at a great cost, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of closure. With the legal battles finally behind her, Emily turned her attention back to her life. She poured her energy into teaching, finding joy in helping her students discover their voices. Rebuilding Together continued to grow, with more women finding strength and solace in their shared experiences. One evening, as she and Lily baked cookies in their newly redecorated kitchen, Lily looked up at her with a curious expression. "Mom," she asked, "are we happy now?" Emily paused, her hands covered in flour, and smiled. "I think we are, sweetheart, and it's only going to get better." Emily's journey shows us that even in the darkest moments, there's a path forward. If her story has inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience and hope to life. As Emily's fight against Mark reached its apex, the stakes continued to climb. The court's decision to extend Mark's sentence was a victory, but it came with new dangers and challenges. Mark's downfall was complete, but the ripple effects of his schemes, betrayals, and vendettas were far from over. Emily's focus shifted from defeating Mark to safeguarding the life she was building for herself and Lily. One morning, just as Emily was beginning to feel a sense of normalcy, an unmarked envelope appeared in her mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its message simple yet chilling. "I'm not done." Emily's hands shook as she read the note. Who could have sent it? Mark was in prison, his accomplices under investigation. Was this a last-ditch effort by one of his allies, or was it someone she had overlooked? She immediately called Miranda, who advised her to report it to the police and double-check her home security. "You've made enemies by standing up for yourself," Miranda said, "but don't let them intimidate you. We're not backing down." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to let fear dictate her actions now. That evening, Sophie showed up at Emily's door with a suitcase in hand. "I'm staying until this is over," she announced, her fiery determination a comforting presence. Emily couldn't help but laugh, the tension easing for the first time that day. "What are you going to do, guard the house with your yoga mat?" "Laugh all you want," Sophie said, plopping her suitcase down in the living room. "But no one messes with my best friend and gets away with it." The two women spent the evening strategizing, reviewing the evidence they had already gathered, and brainstorming potential suspects. Sophie's humor and unwavering loyalty reminded Emily that she wasn't alone in this fight. As the investigation into the anonymous note unfolded, Emily began to notice subtle inconsistencies in her daily routine. A cup misplaced here, a drawer slightly ajar there. At first, she dismissed them as paranoia, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. One night, she discovered her work laptop had been tampered with, files were missing, and her emails had been accessed without her knowledge. Panicked, she called Miranda, who immediately connected her with a cybersecurity expert. The expert's findings were alarming. Someone had installed spyware on Emily's devices, tracking her every move. The digital trail led back to one of Mark's former business partners, a man named Todd Erickson, who had managed to avoid significant scrutiny during the initial investigations. Emily and Miranda decided to confront Todd directly. With Sophie and the cybersecurity expert in tow, they arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. When Todd arrived, he looked confident, almost smug, as if he believed himself untouchable. But as Miranda laid out the evidence against him, emails, financial records, and traces of the spyware, his composure began to crumble. "You think you're so clever," Todd sneered, his bravado faltering. "But you don't know the half of it." Emily leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "Then why don't you tell us?" Todd hesitated, his gaze darting around the room. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. Fine, Mark wanted leverage. Even from prison, he thought he could control you. I was supposed to find something, anything, to use against you. But when I couldn't, he told me to scare you instead. The revelation sent a chill down Emily's spine. Even behind bars, Mark had tried to manipulate her life. But now, with Todd's confession, she had the final piece she needed to sever his influence for good. With Todd's confession in hand, Miranda arranged for a final hearing to present the evidence of Mark's continued harassment and manipulation. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as Emily took the stand one last time. She spoke of the fear she had lived with, the toll it had taken on her and Lily, and the strength she had found in standing up to Mark's tyranny. Her voice was steady, her words clear and resolute. "This isn't just about me," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "It's about every person who's ever been controlled, deceived, or silenced. I won't be silenced anymore." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When the final ruling came, it was decisive. Mark's privileges were revoked, his communication strictly limited, and any future attempts at manipulation would result in additional charges. For Emily, it was the closure she had fought so hard to achieve. With Mark's influence finally eradicated, Emily focused on building the life she and Lily deserved. She continued her work with Rebuilding Together, which had grown into a thriving community resource, and even began exploring creative outlets she had long neglected. One sunny afternoon, Emily and Lily visited a local art studio where they painted side by side. Watching Lily's brushstrokes, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. They were no longer living in Mark's shadow. They were free. Emily's story is a testament to the power of resilience and the courage it takes to reclaim your life. If her journey has inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope and empowerment to life. As the dust finally settled on the chaos that had consumed Emily's life, she found herself standing at the edge of a new beginning. The years of betrayal, manipulation, and heartbreak had left scars. But they also forged a version of Emily that was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. This was her story's conclusion, a journey of resilience, healing, and triumph over adversity. The first thing Emily did after the final court ruling was take a deep breath, a real one. It was the first time in years that she felt the weight of fear and uncertainty lift from her chest. With Mark's influence eradicated and Todd's confession ensuring his remaining allies were held accountable, Emily could finally focus on the life she wanted to build for herself and Lily. Their small house became a sanctuary. Emily painted the walls bright, welcoming colors, filled the shelves with books she loved, and planted flowers in the backyard with Lily. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, a quiet declaration of independence from the shadows that had once loomed over her. For Lily, the transition wasn't without its challenges. She missed her father, even as she began to understand why he was no longer in their lives. Emily approached these conversations with care, ensuring Lily felt safe to express her feelings while gently guiding her toward acceptance. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily turned to her mother with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Dad will ever change?" she asked. Emily considered her answer carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "But what I do know is that we're stronger together, and no matter what, I'll always be here for you." Lily smiled, her gaze soft. "I know, Mom, and I'm glad we're happy now." Emily's work with rebuilding together became a cornerstone of her new life. The support group blossomed into a thriving community organization, offering workshops, counseling, and resources for women facing betrayal and abuse. Emily's story, though painful, became a beacon of hope for others, proof that it was possible to rebuild after devastation. At one of their events, a young woman approached Emily with tears in her eyes. "Your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic relationship," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you." Emily hugged her, the moment a powerful reminder of why she had chosen to share her journey. The pain she endured hadn't been for nothing. It was now a tool for change and empowerment. Sophie, ever the loyal and fiery best friend, remained by Emily's side throughout her transformation. But as Emily's life settled, Sophie had her own exciting news. She was engaged. I know," Sophie said, waving off Emily's teasing. "Me settling down. Who would have thought?" Emily laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You deserve it, Sophie. After everything you've done for me, it's your turn to be the center of attention." The wedding planning became a joyful distraction, a reminder that life could still hold moments of beauty and celebration even after hardship. For Emily, the true culmination of her journey came when she decided to visit Mark in prison, not out of obligation or lingering emotion, but for closure. It was a decision she mulled over for weeks, finally realizing that she needed to face him one last time to truly move on. The prison visitation room was stark and cold, but Emily walked in with quiet confidence. Mark looked up as she entered, his face a mixture of surprise and guilt. Gone was the man who had once commanded attention with his charm and confidence. In his place was someone small, defeated. "Emily," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "But I needed to say a few things for myself." Mark nodded, his gaze dropping to the table between them. Emily continued, her voice steady. "You hurt me, you hurt Lily. And for a long time, I let that define me. But not anymore. I've rebuilt my life, and I'm stronger than I ever was. I came here to tell you that I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine." Mark's eyes filled with tears, but Emily didn't waver. She stood, her peace made, and left without looking back. As the years passed, Emily's life continued to evolve. Lily thrived. Excelling in school and exploring her passions for art and music, Emily herself found love again, though she approached it cautiously, taking the time to heal fully before opening her heart. She continued her work with Rebuilding Together, which expanded beyond Crestwood to neighboring towns and eventually online, reaching women across the country. Emily's journey from betrayal to empowerment became a cornerstone of the organization's mission, inspiring countless others to take control of their lives. One summer evening, Emily sat on her porch, a cup of tea in hand and Max lying lazily at her feet. The setting sun cast the sky in hues of orange and pink, and she watched as Lily played in the yard with friends. The sound of their laughter filled the air, a melody of hope and renewal. Emily thought back to everything she had endured, the lies, the betrayals, the battles fought and won. It hadn't been easy, and the scars would always remain. But she was proud of how far she had come. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggles into strength. And as she watched Lily run freely through the yard, she knew she had done it for her. Emily's story is proof that even in the darkest times, there is a path forward. It's a story of resilience, courage, and the power of rebuilding, not just for yourself, but for those you love. If this journey has inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories of hope and transformation. Thank you for watching. And remember, no matter what challenges you face, you have the strength to overcome them. We'll see you in the next story. Ready to share this journey? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more incredible stories. Until next time.